Galactic's attention and worries were on the rise. Humanity, pronounced humanity, had expanded rapidly in its own solar system after becoming sublight capable. The speed at which humanity expanded its technological portfolio only grew rapidly, never slowing. Still unable to create a working FTL-capable ship, it didn't stop them from reaching out amongst the void and grasping onto distant planets and moons. Mining operations on Saturn's moons had only been going on for about a decade. Many freighters were used to transport the massive quantity of resources back to orbital refineries on Earth and Mars. While it still took over a week to get there were not many warships at humanity's disposal. The few they had were mainly for show, although theoretically they would have no problem going to the distant mining operations. They usually stayed near Earth and Mars. The Rujakli, however, had developed FTL long before humanity reached the age of castles and knights. The warring species had fought numerous sublight territory wars with neighboring planets long before coming to the galactic stage. When they did, the current factions, which had squabbles with each other, had to unionize into a galactic senate against them. The First and Second Rujakli Wars ravaged the bordering worlds, leaving 12 of them no longer habitable. As war progressed, technology had to advance faster to keep the edge. Plasma and laser weaponry became the norm after strong shields were deployed. This led to shields designed to withstand massive amounts of plasma and laser energy, dispersing it around the shield rather than only stopping and reflecting at a point of impact. Ship hulls became much thinner to make room for massive generators and compressed gases to provide ammunition for the weapons. This led to a stalemate, as neither side could adequately destroy each other's fleets rapidly without expending large amounts of resources. The territories gained and lost on both sides were reluctantly agreed to be kept by whoever held them at the armistice. There were still smaller proxy wars constantly being fought on outer rim planets, but both sides never officially acknowledged them for fear of sparking another full-scale war. The mining stations around Saturn had small-point defense weaponry to stop meteor shells from damaging expensive equipment or kinetic-based turrets mounted around the stations, with an occasional one or two on a driller or freighter. When the Rujakli found humanity's quiet and undiscovered sector of space, they thought they could easily wipe out this unknown species and rip its system of all it could offer without repercussions. If no other faction had knowledge of this sector, no one would report it missing. They first attacked the Saturn array, capturing it quickly while losing a handful of fighters. Their plasma cannons made quick work of the unshielded stations and relatively small ships in the area. The Rujakli expedition called for its own miners to warp in and start working, thinking this was all their new prey was capable of. They didn't bother immediately jumping to the next planet, and instead began stripping their current bounty. Planet hopping was a strong part of their doctrine, but usually not before most resources could be mined. Unbeknownst to them, a group of 7 freighters and haulers made a quiet escape and warned incoming ships of the dangers that lay ahead. Since the mostly peaceful unification of Earth, many former separate countries, now called states, had their militaries formed into ceremonial militias, natural disaster relief, and aid organizations. Combat training was still prevalent, but there had not been a serious conflict in a long time. Nevertheless, furious people all around the system called to arms. This magnitude of recruitment had not been seen since humanity's Second World War. Millions drove to recruitment centers of many different states, putting a great strain on not just recruitment and training centers, but also on the militaries themselves. Millions of uniforms, weapons, munitions, vehicles, food and water rations, and countless other products had to be produced at a faster rate than ever before. Much like the Second World War, factories were repurposed from producing goods and commodities into producing the great dagger of humanity. It took nearly 9 months to form the first 7 divisions of both Army and Marines, and 3 fleets into combat-ready forces. Nearly a quarter of them were fresh volunteers. Within the second year of the war, humanity was able to field 350 divisions and 70 fleets for frontline combat alone, not even including support divisions and fleets. The vast majority had never even thought about military life just 2 years ago. Now, the species that had spent most of its life killing each other could direct all its pent-up rage and aggression towards a single enemy. When a species or faction that grew up in war finally stops, small political disagreements can spark the roaring flame of combat they had grown accustomed to. The opening salvos may have been fired by the Rujakli, but the returning storm of tungsten and depleted uranium from humanity shook the galaxy to its core. The single naval squadron and mining corps that had eaten away at half of Saturn's moons were ill-prepared for humanity's retaliation. The outnumbered ships nearly stood still in shock at the amount of warships that arrived. They had grown complacent after 9 months of no retaliation or reconnaissance, assuming humanity had given their planet to them in hopes the Rujakli would not attack again. Before they had a chance to even turn their guns towards what they thought were weak, unshielded, and easy targets, every single one of humanity's guns opened fire at the cyclic rate. Within a blink of their 3 eyes, they had lost close to half their ships. Caught out in front of this imposing foe, their shields, specifically designed to counter energy weapons, were ineffective against the hard-hitting kinetic weapons, which passed right through their shields, shredding the thin hulls of their ships and detonating payloads in the center of critical systems and cargo areas. The squadron commander for the Rujakli, Rear Commodore Gatray Fleek, watched in horror as many of his ships turned into supernovas of exploding fuel and gases. His shock soon turned into utter fear as the boarding alarm sounded across many of the remaining ships. Before he could even learn the name of this new warrior race, he had lost. He had executed any that were captured, not even bothering to study them. In turn, he had no idea what humanity was capable of. He would soon find out that his captors were called Marines and that they did not take the loss of their own lightly. The remainder of the Rujakli's ships immediately began to send out distress calls and beacons. One recorded message went as follows: 1067 Squadron Signal Command Ship, break, break, break. High Command, this is 1067 Squadron SC, BFI's new discovery, Sol-Free Sector 21, under heavy assault by numerically superior force. Half a squadron has been destroyed. About a quarter has been boarded by the recently marked species. Over. Royal Rujakli High Command Signal Group, say again, 1.067, over. The squadron signal command ship replied, I say again, we are under attack. Most of our fleet has been destroyed. Signal ship is currently being boarded by an unknown size element of warrior class. Over. Rujakli High Command Signal Group replied, hold fast 1067, we will send reinforcements within the standard week. Over. 1067 Squadron Signal Command Ship responded, negative, I say again, half a squadron has been destroyed and we have been boarded. Any ships that are not being boarded or are too damaged are preparing for FTL travel to friendly space. Over. Rujakli High Command Signal Group inquired, how long has the battle been waged for? Why did you not contact us sooner if you've received contact? Over. 1067 Squadron Signal Command Ship answered, fighting has only been going on for approximately 30 units. They have weapons that disable our shields. We are fighting off. Yelling was heard in the background, indicating the room was then breached by human forces and connection was lost in the ensuing firefight. Humanity had captured 17 warships and mining freighter ships while destroying 89. Only 4 were able to make it back to Rujakli space. Although it is theorized that close to 11 others attempted to flee and broke apart during FTL due to structural damage. Humanity had lost 21 fighter craft and sustained minor damage to a small number of its other class ships during the boarding of enemy ships. The Marines lost 131 dead, 556 wounded, and 155 MIA. One Rujakli ship had been able to jump out of the system with its boarding party still on it. When they attempted to rout the Marines who had held up within one of the central cargo bays, it took 98 days to finally clear them out. The food and water storage space that had been fortified by the Marines was so successful that the 155 of Company C, 1st Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment, 2nd Division had a kill ratio of approximately 26-1. In the end, the 22 that remained had run out of ammo for both their weapons and the captured weapons. The losses humanity sacrificed on the first day were eternalized as the first heroes of the long conflict. The miners and other civilian contractors killed in the initial contact were martyred, with multiple statues and memorials dedicated to them across human space. When news spread through the Rujakli territories of what had happened, shock ran through their entire empire. They immediately put in purchase requests for more ships from neighboring factions, yet only 2 agreed, fearing retaliation if they declined. This in turn spawned panic in many other nearby factions, fearing the Rujakli were preparing for a third territory war. What informers and espionage agents of the Galactic Britannian Senate learned a few weeks later about this new unknown species that had so quickly disposed of the Rujakli squadron, a vote was put into play to provide aid in the form of a lend-lease program so after the war ended, they could collect interest on the loans. It came to a very close vote of 611 for and 634 against, with 39 abstaining. Several small factions requested permission to still give lend-lease ships to the Rujakli, with only a small amount ever approved by the Senate. The second largest faction at the time in the Libertarian Senate was the fired Keldane, and put a second vote to send a first contact diplomatic team to the new faction, with a subsection of reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. The votes came to a majority to not send a diplomatic mission, but to still send a reconnaissance team. When the recon group entered near the edge of human space, still believing that the species had not developed scanners capable of detecting them, they were surprised to find that not only were they almost instantly spotted, but that their scanners had shown a combat squadron heading their way. An immediate request was put in to establish neutral diplomacy with the approaching ships as a way to gather intel without coming off as hostile. Once approved, they had to wait 5 days for the ambassador and diplomat teams to arrive while also trying to establish communication and hold a non-threatening posture. Although this is technically considered second contact, it was the first diplomatic contact with humanity. After almost being fired upon, humanity extended its olive branch, meaning to give peace or resolve conflict. This was troublesome because after humanity opened up to the Senate after 3 months of talks and diplomatic meetings, they discovered that a few smaller factions had still been able to give lend-lease ships to their enemy. In retaliation, the Senate quickly barred military trade with the Rujakli Empire but refused to stop sending food and commodities, fearing the Rujakli would also retaliate. Humanity was surprisingly understanding but made it clear this was not to their liking. 13 months after the initial raid and 4 months after the retaliatory strikes, humanity had successfully reverse-engineered the FTL of the captured ships. This again sent absolute shockwaves through the galaxy. It was unheard of for any kind to have done it so quickly. Even spacefaring sublight factions given FTL technology took much longer to understand and utilize it. The first human diplomats arrived at the Senate 1 month later, accompanied by the now battle-hardened 1st Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment. Many Senate leaders thought this was an invasion, but humanity, having won the war not knowing what they were about to see and wanting to be prepared, rotated out its legendary battalion for rest, recuperation, and refit. Many factions thought humanity was a constant heart attack, with one species even referring to them as the deadliest warriors still skeptical of humanity's strength. The Senate asked for a demonstration of their firepower. The human diplomats declined, much to the dismay of many Senate leaders and the Marines and sailors who wanted to scare the factions straight. Meanwhile, back in humanity's home system, 2 full Rujakli fleets entered the Saturn sector. This battle lasted much longer as humanity was outnumbered. They kept their 2 other fleets near Earth as a reserve and home defense force until more ships could be brought into action. The human fleet still annihilated the Rujakli fleet, losing very few warships and close to 400 fighters, although many fighter losses were due to inexperienced pilots. Humanity now had 103 captured warships and 6,000 captured Rujakli. When FTL travel became available for humanity's fleets, they sent 8 fleets to Saturn and 2 to each other planet in the system. The first fleet, now in contact for 6 months, was rotated out and set to be refitted with FTL drives. The second and third fleets also returned at 1-month intervals. The day the first fleet arrived back over Earth was celebrated as an interplanetary holiday named Fleet Day. Many of the Marines who had seen combat returned to be praised as heroes and were used as recruitment media to boost numbers and raise morale on the home front. Army divisions went to each moon on Saturn, turning them into fortresses and using them as harsh environment training bases. News spread fast in the galactic community, and when it was found that after 2 years of Rujakli throwing fleet after fleet at humanity across Saturn, Jupiter, and Uranus, humans went on the offensive, changing the galaxy's view of them yet again. Factions not in the Senate had learned of humanity. Factions across the galaxy began requesting human mercenary groups. This became a great annoyance for the now tired human diplomats, who had answered far more questions than they could reasonably handle. When the Rujakli diplomats stormed into the Senate demanding help, they became frightened of what stood before them, human diplomats guarded by human Marines. As one Marine Corporal Ferdinand put it, "These 3-eyed expletives shattered bricks when they saw us standing there in our dress uniforms, decorated with combat and valor medals Marine spits a brown liquid known as dip into a container. When "Why all saw us, your expletive a few too," the term "to expletive a brick" is slang for defecating oneself when frightened. Although initially intending to remain neutral, the diplomatic and recon team reported back such large amounts of intel that it became worrisome not to be allied with humanity. When the Rujakli diplomats discovered humanity had secretly allied with the Senate, they threatened open war. Before anyone could answer, a Marine officer yelled across the room, "Bring it on expletive lips. You expletive with our boats, and now want to expletive with our newfound allies. You've got another thing coming." Boats refer to warfaring ships on Earth, and expletive is slang for male genitalia, indicating a threat. Learning about humanity's homeworld of Earth, sometimes called Terra, again caused anxiety among Senate leaders. After 6 months of diplomacy, humanity established a permanent embassy guarded by elite Marine security forces, who seemed almost stoic and unmoving. The remaining diplomats and Marine battalion returned to Earth. This day was named Marine Day and recognized in the Senate as Humanitarian Diplomacy Peace Day. Rujakli, on average, stood around 5 feet 4 inches to 5 feet 7 inches tall and came from a low-level hell world. Humanity, however, stood at 5 feet 11 inches to 6 feet 4 inches and came from a high-level death world. This gave humanity more advantages in ground combat. When a new system was targeted for invasion, it was common practice to deploy Space Force recon fighters and light cruisers to scout space, orbital, ground, and air defenses. This provided enough information for initial strike teams to apply surgical strikes, minimizing civilian casualties and effectively destroying most defenses. Within a very short time, human special forces groups were deployed to secure landing zones and conduct deep penetration sabotage to take out remaining defenses too close to civilians. Once the Marines landed and established a large perimeter, the Army would be brought in to create a driving force to push long distances into enemy lines. This tactic was new to the galaxy as no faction had a dedicated force that could fight in space and ships and as shock troops to create a large opening in enemy lines. This was soon implemented into many faction militaries. Some factions in the Senate requested to aid in the fight with humanity and train with the Marines. These requests often came from Rujakli neighbors who saw this as an opportunity to liberate lost territory from previous wars and free their own people still suffering as slaves. While most of the Senate was undecided about declaring war, a new charter was drafted among those wishing to fight with Terra. The proposed charter allowed any faction within the Senate to decide if they wished to provide aid or fight alongside humanity without repercussions or scrutiny against them or those who chose not to. Human diplomats referred to this as the No Bad Blood Charter, and it passed unanimously. The charter allowed humanity to decide what to do with original Rujakli space if the war ended in an armistice. The Human Rujakli War was then declared the Third Rujakli War. In the later days of the war, many militaries fighting alongside humans described their tactics as complete disintegration of enemy forces. They did not stop fighting until the enemy was dead or had surrendered. This made multiple factions fearful that humanity would conquer them once the war was over. Almost never on the defensive, humanity took the fight to the enemy's doorstep. When humanity fought outside their solar system, it struck fear into the Senate. It was commonly thought this would be the end of all Rujakli. What shocked the galaxy was that humanity did not intentionally attack civilians. Most factions would attack civilian centers to kill off the enemy entirely. The Senate thought the wars would be claimed by human conquerors. Some factions even thought they should take the war spoils instead. However, humanity freed any enslaved species and returned the planetary system to its original faction. They did not enslave Rujakli civilians but relocated them off captured worlds onto already conquered Rujakli worlds. In the short few years the galaxy had known humans, they struck fear into all, showing they were the highest class of warriors. Then, they showed compassion, changing how the galaxy ruled and made decisions. Not long after the war ended in unconditional surrender, the Rujakli remnant was welcomed into the Senate on probationary terms. Shortly after, the Galactic Britannian Senate was renamed the Galactic Britannian Senate in honor of humanity's contributions. Humanity was the strongest, and many thought it would rule the Senate. Instead, they expanded their borders into unclaimed space and requested an equal seat in the Senate, not as the leading faction. 125 years after the last major war, We remember all who sacrificed to bring peace. We honor those who bravely gave their lives for the betterment of all factions and species. We remember the nearly 600 million humans and 30 million from other factions who died during the 10-year war. Although close to 7 billion Rujakli died fighting humanity, 125 years later, trade between the factions prospered. During peace talks before the treaty and unconditional surrender, a human diplomat and former general were asked why they didn't annihilate the Rujakli when they started open conflict by attacking and killing a civilian outpost. His response was, "They fought with our boats, we fought with theirs a lot harder. We aren't about killing civilians anymore. Humanity has a long past with that before we reach the stars. We won't let it happen again." A testament to humanity's wrath, honor, and compassion. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.